Hey, and welcome to the Growth Whisperers, where everything we talk about is building enduring great businesses. I'm Brad Giles, and I'm joined today, as always, by my co-host, Kevin Lawrence in Vancouver, in Canada. Welcome today, Kevin. How are you doing today?
I'm doing really well, Brad. It's been a long day, but we've done a great conversation preparing for today's show, and I'm really looking forward to it.
Yeah, a great conversation. Talking today about a really, really simple subject, but sometimes the simple things need a bit extra work, right? So, what are we talking about today?
Well, but before we talk about that, how are you doing today? How's things going in your world?
I'm pretty good. Yeah, I'm pretty
Yeah.
good. Um,
Okay.
there's a lot of people in the world who have financial or health issues. Overall, I'm just grateful. That's probably my word for the day. Just in my
Yeah.
head, I'm just grateful that where I live for my health and my family and everything else. It's there's a lot of gratitude at the moment.
I think that's a great thing. That's a great word probably for life is to be grateful. I was having a conversation with a CEO today and talking about problems and then reminding ourselves that these are problems of fortune and, first world kind of problems. So today we're going to talk about something called start, stop, keep. It's really basic, although it's really powerful. It's a mechanism to gather feedback from people around you. And it's generally done with people on your team or in your company. It can be done with other people. It can be done with suppliers or other partners or your peers or your boss. But today we're going to dig into this thing called the start, stop, keep. And it's just three basic words that lead to ideally really powerful conversations, and in some cases, really powerful insights.
That's Yeah, that's a great word to describe it. Simple. But why do you think it's powerful? What makes you describe it as being powerful in your experience?
Well, two things. First of all, it's easy to remember.
Yeah.
So it's not complicated, and it's meant to be a tool where in one use you would go and say to your team, hey, let's all go talk to our teams and we'll do a start, stop, keep conversation. You sit down with people and saying, hey, from your perspective, should we start doing, stop doing, and keep doing? And you could look forward, so we're successful over the next few years, or just as is in this moment. But it's an easy primer or system to have a very impactful conversation. Because if we say, hey, why don't you go get some feedback from your team? That's a hard thing for people to do. So not only
Yeah.
is it direct them and make it easy to have the conversation, it's likely that you're going to have similar conversations because people aren't going to get lost in long questions or interpreting it different ways.
I guess for me, I think it's powerful because it it gets the perspectives of different people. It's a great, obviously simple is what's so good about it, but it's a
Yep.
great tool to get people's perspectives and to make them feel like they're valued and included, like their input. It's There are a few other areas where there's a formality um, and a structure to go to a person and say, what should we start doing? What should we
Yep.
stop doing? And what should we keep doing? So the formality is and the structure is great. But as a recipient of that question, it makes you think. And it also makes you think they care about my opinion. They care about my response. I need to think carefully here. Are they going to value what I'm saying and what are they going to do with it and how's it going to be used? So, for all of those reasons, in terms of culture, I think it's really, really valuable to build engagement.
It is, and especially if you do it right, especially if you go through the process and do get that feedback and you respect it and act on it in a way where the people have contributed feel like you actually heard them and acted on some of it. So, one of the most important things, and whether it's a start, stop, keep, or a survey of some sort, where people really mess up, and it'll be on our don't do list, which is don't close the loop afterwards, right? Don't not close the loop, pardon me, which is to go back and thank them for the feedback, and then tell them what's going to happen as a result. So that only validates that they contributed and it was valuable, but then they can see some progress. And
I think that's a really important point. So let's just be really clear about what we mean by closing the loop, because I've had this question a lot of times, and people can go, yeah, we close the loop, we talk about it, but that's not necessarily what we're saying when we say close the loop. So what's your definition, start, stop, keep, to close the loop? Can you give us an example of what you mean by that?
Sure. So if one, and again, the way I like to look at this is, if there's the things that get handled in the moment, by the way, there's a bunch of stuff where someone says, hey, we should move the printer from here to here because it would save 10 hours a week. Okay. Yeah. Well, why don't you just go do that now, or call the IT person, sort that out. We don't need this to be in part of our process. Like, that's just, let's please get that done today.
Yeah. But it's still a good idea.
It's a great idea, and it should be addressed on, it doesn't need to come into this start, stop, keep process.
Yes.
So there's a lot of stuff, by the way, once you flush it out, people, when they share their ideas, sometimes they just need permission to go and do it.
Yeah.
And there's so many no-brainer ideas that come up that the manager should just deal with that on the spot. So, but where I'm talking about closing the loop, where we're talking about closing the loop, is when it gets submitted, and it's something that might be a little bit bigger, or takes some more thought requirement. And let's just say that we have a whole bunch of ideas, and there's a real common pattern, and there's a common pattern around people needing more competency around Excel. And the start was, we need Excel training.
Yep.
Or something like that.
Yeah.
Is to feed back to the group and say, hey, here's one of the patterns. Here's one of the major themes, this top 5 themes. Here's one that came out, and here's what we're going to do about it. Or here's one that came out, this Excel training, and we're going to let your departments deal with it, or we're going to deal with it next year. Or here's a link to the best 1-hour video that our Excel masters put out. And it's somehow acting on the critical stuff, from what I look at, is the big trends. There's other things that come up, like when somebody's got a very specific hot issue for them. And if it's really hot and really sensitive, there would be issues that would come out that you might need to close stuff with people personally as well. But that's my take on it. In the work that we do, we tend to act on the big ones as the process, and go back and close. And again, closing the loop, it's, we're doing it, we're not doing it, and here's why. We might do it in the future, or we need to re-educate you about this because there's already something in place you might not have been aware. What's your take on that, Brad?
Yeah, I think for me, closing the loop means I have to go back one step to answer that question. So trust is born through vulnerability. Okay, so if you would like to build trust with someone, one of the first steps is to be vulnerable, and then they will respect that and they will be vulnerable. And so when we look at the start, stop, keep, there is an element to a degree of asking people to be vulnerable, to come up with, to give their opinion to their bosses, or even their bosses' bosses, about what should be done. So they are being vulnerable and being asked to be trusted to present what could be risky ideas. Because moving the printer is a simple one, but there could be lots of other things that are risky for them in their career, but we're asking them to be honest and to trust. So For me, closing the loop is about respecting that vulnerability that they've entrusted to the leadership team to be honest and direct and to articulate what what the real issues are, rather than skirting around or talking about
Right.
other things. So closing the
So
loop
you're
for me,
saying it's to really, really is to really honor the fact that they've
yeah,
opened up and being vulnerable. And so,
yes,
so starting with that mindset,
yeah.
closing the loop, and I've got another point about the being vulnerable piece, which we'll come back to, but closing the loop for you is what?
The person who's provided the answers to the start, stop, keep needs to have a response. I think that we should upgrade our fleet of vehicles. Now, it doesn't matter if it's a yes or a no or a postpone, but some kind of response. Thanks for that.
Are you saying to respond to every single suggestion back to the suggester?
Not not necessarily.
Okay,
Okay,
good.
and that's
Good.
well,
Please explain.
that's vague. So there's a few different ways to close the loop. The leadership team could do it. The person who conducted the survey could do it. The mid-management team could do it, or it could be done in a broad, let's say, CEO announcement style, where the CEO says, "Okay, so we've completed all of the start, stop, keeps. These are the main themes. I want to address some of the more controversial ones or some of the different ones."
Okay.
Yeah. So we're not going to
Yeah, my
upgrade.
concern is if you've got, 250 people, and let's say you even go and talk to 25 of them, and they've each got, half a dozen start, stop, keeps.
Yeah.
25 times 6 is 150 individual ideas through 25 people, and they're, next thing you know, you've made yourself a full-time job for a human being in a business. And yeah, and that's why. So you're saying similar. What I'm saying is on some of the major ones or the major themes. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah. What are the themes? So there could be an item that 8 people all bring up. And what is the item? What does it mean? And how should we address that? So it's
What
really
would be an
about.
example, Brad? I'm with you 100%. What would be an example?
Well, I mentioned we're going to should we upgrade our fleet of vehicles?
Yeah.
Okay. Um, we like driving new cars better than we like driving old cars. So I think that we should start upgrading our fleet of vehicles. Right now, an answer to that in a broadcast sense. So one of the jobs, in my humble opinion, is that one of the CEO's roles is to be an ambassador. I wrote about that in
Yep.
my book, Made to Thrive. And so being an ambassador, the CEO would say, these are some of the things that the broader things that came out of our start, stop, keep. One of them was, should we upgrade our fleet of vehicles? Now, our fleet of vehicles have still got 2.5 years to run on their lease. At that point, when the lease expiry runs, we're going to look at upgrading. But at this point, we're going to have to make do because it's still under lease.
And thank you so much to the handful of you that made that recommendation. I appreciate it.
Yeah.
Or it could be we should switch to hybrid vehicles or battery powered vehicles because it's better for the environment. Or we should upgrade our employee benefits, which comes up a lot. And often we have to re-educate people to the benefits that we have because they don't know. So basically closing the loop, like we said, is to go back, and it just doesn't disappear into a black hole. Because if you
Yes.
really want to piss somebody off and disengage people, ask them for all their wonderful feedback, and then crickets, pure silence. It's like you go in a restaurant having a meal that's not satisfactory. You say something, and then no one ever says anything back. They just go, okay, it doesn't work. So
because they
the
think that
closing
you
loop
just don't
is
care. They think that you
yes,
just don't care, and then they don't invest next time in being vulnerable and
correct.
honest, and then suddenly your well-intentioned start, stop, keep conversations that you set off to get more employee engagement is actually working against you, because no one's telling you what they
Correct.
really think.
Yes,
So
they'll just go, oh, those idiots at corporate again, or the idiots in head office, or the bosses, you know, and you reinforce the story they have that you don't care and you're out of touch. So yeah, that's good. So that's the one. The other thing that was inspired by what you said there, Brad, about you know, they're being vulnerable, is never shoot the messengers. You will hear stuff that you don't like, and you may not agree with, and you might not even think is true. But what I know is that when things are really bad, and some companies we worked with had some pretty bad stuff going on in pockets. And when someone is brave and bold enough to step up and go, you know, you need to see this, there's a tendency to be defensive, which shuts them down. So don't shoot the message. And I have a technique. Now I have a very, I can have strong responses quickly sometimes. And when I catch myself on this to keep, because I want people to keep sharing, is if I do kind of react a bit too much, I will say, hey, and often I will, if it happened in a group, I'll say it in front of the group. Hey, my apologies. You know, Francine, thank you so much for sharing that. Francine, my fault. I didn't hear you out properly. That's, you know, so my apologies, but that what you shared was so darn important. And I apologize for how I approached it. Please forget that I did it and continue to share these things. This is what we need to hear. And then I'll go up on a break and I'll say it again to her one-on-one. Because Francine was brave and bold, and I might have, you may never mess it up, Brad. And those listening may never mess it up. I mess it up, some decent frequency. So, you know, it's like, so if you catch yourself, you can go and clean it up, and to make sure that that comes, because it's a scary proposition for someone to share, you know, especially on the stops or sometimes the starts, that kind of feedback with someone who's perceived to have more authority in a business. That could be really terrifying for them.
I had an example. We introduced the concept of the start, stop, keep to the leadership team. We got the HR manager to go out and conduct. We said let's do like 2 a week. So over a quarter, we did 26. 13 weeks, 2 per week. It was a pretty simple kind of job, but the HR manager was a little bit defensive, let's just say. And every time someone would bring something up, they didn't go in with the intent to capture, to be a researcher who's capturing the data. Because someone would bring something up, and then they would instinctively feel the need to respond to that and say, no, but this is why we haven't upgraded the fleet of vehicles, to use our previous example, or this is, no, that's why. And I had to
they wouldn't receive it. And Brad, it's almost like the rules of brainstorming. The rules of brainstorming is collect the ideas, no opinions, or anything, no evaluation. Thank you. Can I get a little bit more information? Right? It's a receiving and extracting exercise, and that's probably a great pro tip for people. Right? It's a receiving and extracting, but you better have your guard down when you do it and be relaxed. Otherwise, if you push back, they're going to shut down, and that's not the intent.
Well, a good filter that I've used before is asking that person, and this was to close out that HR story. The coaching that I provided to her was, when you go in next time, only ask questions. Like, you can ask clarifying questions. So what should we start? We should, okay, just so I can write your idea accurately, please, can you just expand on that a little bit?
Yeah.
And that's the only things that this person was allowed to say. And then they went on and we went through subsequent quarters and they got better at it. But we had to repair the trust that was damaged, because, to your original point, they were shooting the messenger. They were, the person was like, I'm not going to do this anymore. I'm not going to get
I,
involved
I
in
have
this.
seen this so often, Brad. And it's also, with executives, because sometimes they feel insulted or bothered by the stuff they're hearing and they want to judge those people. And if you, yeah, it's self-management and it's EQ. It's, you got to have a pretty good EQ on this, or just ask questions and have no opinions.
So another quick example on the point that you just made, there was another leadership team, and we introduced, separate to the first example. And so what we did is we introduced the concept of the start, stop, keep. Now, this leadership team, they thought they were ticking all the boxes. They were very confident in who they were. I'd push back on it and say, well, it doesn't really look like we've done this right. And they'd be like, nah, don't worry about it. Let's move on. Let's move on. So I had this kind of, you remember there was a cartoon called Spider-Man? Well, he had this
Yes.
thing called the Spidey sense,
Yep.
right? Well, I had this kind of Spidey sense that if they were doing it to me, they were doing it in other parts of the business as well. And so we went through and we kind of stuck to the rhythm of the start, stop, keep, and we got the middle managers, not the leadership team, to conduct some surveys. And there was some brutal truths in there that they didn't want to hear, which is, we're good, but we're not great. Like the things you
Yes.
say when you're saying we've executed something, we haven't really done a good job of it. And yeah, so that was an example, not so much of don't shoot the messenger, because that worked, but the start, stop, keep, when used in leadership teams like this, can really unlock some important facts within the business that you may not anticipate, that your ego may have let you down on.
Yes. And that, my friend, is why I often, in the organizations I work with, like to do this and incorporate this into surveys we do around all of our quarterly meetings. Because if you're an executive and you're not an A player, you're a B player or a toxic A player, right? A high performing jerk. Well, you're going to go do and start, stop, keep. You're filtering that information that comes up to us, because you're doing it through your team generally. You're not going to let the stuff come up that I probably actually really need to know and that might show what's going wrong within your team. So that's also why the conversation version I love, particularly in healthy environments. And it's a great conversation to have, but it's also why I like doing surveys, because you go right to the source and people can't corrupt the data on the way up.
Yeah.
And again, there's pros and cons to all of them. And in a healthy environment, I think it's very, very a powerful exercise. And I think there's probably, like everything, there's a combination that's probably the ultimate.
What's really important is this is a qualitative response, not a quantitative. So quantitative, we might have an employee net promoter score or a CSAT type score, like for employees, some kind of measure number, but this is the qualitative stuff. And we don't get that rarely. So on to our next point, it's important to analyze the data and discuss it as a leadership team. And not only to actually analyze it, to talk about what is actually happening here, because it's very easy, and I've seen this many times, where start, stop, keeps are conducted by businesses. At the beginning, they're talking about it, and then it just kind of gradually drifts away. And then suddenly it's still being conducted, but no one in the leadership team is actually looking at it. So building it as an agenda item into meetings, 10 minutes, we're going to talk about the start, stop, keeps, is really, really important. And then capturing that historically as well. So you've got a searchable database, so that if something keeps popping up in your start, stop, keeps, you're able to look back into the past and say, haven't we had this, like this keeps on recurring, this item?
Yeah, absolutely. And although it sounds simple, people are busy. There's a lot of stuff going on when you're running a company. And that's why, one of the key things, and you've talked about this, you and I talked about this earlier, but is having someone that owns it to make sure that it stays alive, right? Just like normally we would have somebody who owns the customer feedback or um, customer satisfaction data and insights, and making sure it gets acted on, making sure someone owns it. I have a company that I worked with, and going back more than a dozen years. Now, this was employee feedback, but it's customer feedback. So the company, the growth had stopped, right? The company had grown 50 to 100, at least 50% a year over a decade, just growing. It was an unbelievable company, and the growth stopped and stalled. And then they called me in, and so I'm, doing my due diligence, asking about stuff, and I'm like, and the economy was booming, and the executives are telling me stories of, oh, the economy's tough and all this. I'm like, no. And I said, well, what about our customers? Oh, they're thrilled. They're our customers, and I quote, "It's like a tap. We just turn on the tap if we want more revenue." And I'm like, that's a little bit arrogant. Okay. And then I said, well, do you have customer feedback? Yeah, we got an amazing system for customer feedback. Awesome. What are the customers saying? Oh, they're just thrilled. Okay. Can I see it? And I happened to ask to see the data. And on my trip home, I was reviewing the data. And you ever seen cartoons where the steam comes out of the person's ears because they're so angry, or they just drank a bottle of hot sauce or something? Like, my ears are red, there's steam coming out. I'm so angry because it was like 500 lines of data in a spreadsheet, because they were a very transactional business, many customers. There was 3 patterns the customers were screaming. I could hear the yelling inside my head. The customers were all pissed off about 3 big things. So they had this beautiful process to gather the feedback, beautiful reports. Nobody looked at it because nobody in the executive was accountable for it.
Yeah.
So, it took another 2 years to get the growth back. Once you kill the growth in the business, you've got some usually fundamental issues, and you got to fire it up again. So
just to clarify that story, the reason the growth had stalled was because of those 3 issues.
Yeah, because their customers were pissed off.
Yeah.
And you could look at it and you could read it, and but then they've been screaming about the same thing for months and months and months and months, and it hadn't been addressed.
No one was looking at it.
And the executives were all in their little happy land, and they were not really good people. They're on their happy land, but it's all good and blah, blah, blah. And they couldn't figure it out. Well, killing. So that's about customers. We're talking about this more from employees, but someone's got to be accountable for it. There should be some measure that's regularly reported, whether it's a KPI or just a task at the executive level of the leadership who needs to be paying attention to this stuff. So as an interesting distinction, we did a bunch of work in a company with Bain, the consulting firm that created the employee net promoter system.
Yes.
What they called with these tasks is, when you analyze it, inner loop and then outer loop. Inner loop is stuff that we can act on within our existing systems and processes and policies. Outer loop, we need to change something substantial in the business, and it's a bigger long-term project. So when you gather a lot of this, there's the stuff that people should just deal with on the spot. That's different. But, if it's inner loop, it's something we should investigate and work on. The other is, changing our compensation policy. Yep. Outer loop. Changing our IT backbone. Outer loop. Yeah. Anyways, it's when you prioritize them, there's like stuff we can deal with, and then stuff that we would have to deal with later on.
That's good. No. That, and I'm thinking back to the cars when you're saying that. I'm thinking, okay, so the cars example is there anything that we can do about it? But it's good because it helps us to very clearly segment what is that. To go back 1 second about the ownership.
Yes.
There's got to be an owner to it, I don't think that the CEO needs to own it, but I think it's important to have it
No.
as an agenda item. So that means like it's got to, I think a non-negotiable, it's got to be discussed by the leadership team at some level, even 5 minutes a week or a month, whatever it is, dedicate
Yes.
time to talk about it.
Yeah, keep it on you. I agree. So our fifth thing that we had on our top five that we listed out here was empowering people to act on a no-brainers in the moment, which we've already touched on. But I want to share an example. Company I worked with in the US, what they did this exercise wholeheartedly, and it was the stops that they felt would be the greatest value this particular quarter. So they had all the teams prepare their stop lists of things that wasted energy, time, friction, whatever it happened to be. And they all, in their meeting on a flip chart, we listed all the major things that they would love to stop doing, mostly in their department. And then they had another one that was company overall, almost in hindsight, like inner loop and outer loop. Inner loop being their department, outer loop being the company overall, or maybe somewhere else. So we took the ones that were there in their area of the department, they put it up on the wall in their department, and the goal in the quarter was to clean out as much of the list as they could. It was like an internal competition to clear out the stops. So when I was doing a tour of the business, you know, and I'd already been working with them for a little bit, but I was seeing the office, and there were all these stop lists with these cross marks on it, and people were so proud to tell me about it. Because so it's you got to remember, we're not always trying to create more work or more decisions at the executive level. A lot of times you can empower people, and it became part of their project for the quarter. And so that's just not, it wasn't just the easy stuff. It was stuff that required work, and it was really, really powerful. I have
Yeah.
another one though I want to say that I would be careful of, because I have another company that took it way too far. We did a quarterly theme called, I think it was batting 1,000. And we wanted to create 1,000 ideas that would improve the business, but ideally eliminate waste. Like to strip,
Yep.
like, in the direction of stops. It was a play on stops. Things that would eliminate waste of time, money, and energy.
Uh,
But when you have 1,000 ideas, it took them
no.
a whole quarter to figure out how to process them. It sounded like this is going back 15 years ago. And in a moment, I didn't catch it. It
Yeah.
sounded awesome. And we were so excited. We had this amazing launch and all the stuff, but it became all the stuff that got bottlenecked with the executive. And it was way too much, even though it was a lot of good ideas. So,
I mean, how long would it take you to read 1,000 ideas alone? A long time.
exactly. So they made the mistake of having everything flow up. You want as much stuff left and managed where it is, right?
Yeah.
And let people act, like that example of the flip charts on the wall.
Yeah. You want start, stop, keeps are great for the whole business, but they're also great for departments. Like in our department
Yes.
only, let's draw a ring fence around our department. What's in our control? What should we start, stop, and keep doing in here? That can be this is not just in the format that we're talking about where a leadership team is gathering qualitative information. This is a tool that you can use anywhere. I remember the first time I came across the start, stop, keep tool maybe 15 or 20 years ago. It was at the Entrepreneurs Organization where the president of the day got the whole chapter, let's say 50 or 60 people, into a room and said, what should we start doing as a chapter? Write all of the ideas from the group on the whiteboard. What should we keep? What should we stop doing? What should we keep doing? And he just had a fully inclusive process with every member. They all got to contribute, and then they prioritized the kind of the top 5 things from all of the ideas, and everyone walked away feeling like they'd been heard, like there was a plan. It was such a simple and effective way in a different format than we're talking about.
Yeah, it's a great example. So this is not rocket science. The whole idea here is to gather some good feedback of how we can improve the business and make things work better. And stops are critical because stops allow you to free up bandwidth and take energy or resources waste on something unproductive, or things that are distracting, or anything that doesn't bring something good, and reinvest those, because
Yeah.
we have finite resources. So it's a simple tool to gather the feedback, and ideally even the value of getting people to think about it, and then they do it themselves. And then for the bigger juicy things, they're things that the leadership team can work on. So it's a basic thing. So Brad, let's review kind of our top 5 things that we suggested here. So
Number one, don't fail to close the loop. So we don't want people to be conducting start, stop, keeps who are being vulnerable, coming up with ideas, and no one's coming back to provide feedback in a public or private forum, in whatever form it is. Like when someone presents an idea, we've got to pay that respect by saying, yes, we're going to do it, or no, we're not, directly or across the whole organization in some form, within the context that we provided earlier. Number two, don't shoot the messengers. The job of the person who is collecting the data is to collect the data. Their job is not to protect the company. It's not to defend the company or any decisions of the company. It's to get the most accurate and honest feedback that they can. Number three, analyze the data as a leadership team and discuss it. Look for trends, patterns, have historical start, stop, keep information that you can search and look for. And then number four is prioritize the top few to deal with at an organizational level. So we want to, there's always going to be an overwhelming amount. What are the most important things on our mission at this point? Have someone to own the data. So have someone to own the start, stop, keep process, and then empower people to act on the no-brainers. So if someone's saying, I think one of the things that we should do is we should move the printer in the office from that side of the office to that side of the office. Just empower them to do it if it makes sense and it's logical. Get on with it. Some of the things are not worthy of the leadership team's time, but they make great sense. So people are empowered. And then finally, the bonus, have someone that owns the start, stop, keep process on an ongoing basis and dedicate that time in your regular meetings.
pretty great list. Again, it's not rocket science, and it helps for you to get better perspectives and get people engaged in what you're doing. And whether it's a normal health check in the business, whether it's tied around your annual planning, it doesn't matter. And my favorite of all of these things, that's all good, but doing it at the end of a quarterly meeting, at the end of a project, or anything, so it gets us to stop, reflect, and then figure out how we do it better next time. So thanks you guys for listening. This has been the Growth Whispers podcast with Brad, and I'm Kevin. And so for the video version, go to youtube.com and search for the Growth Whispers. You'll find us there. For Brad, evolutionpartners.com.au. And for me, Kevin, it's Kevin, or just go to lawrenceandco.com. Have a great week. Keep learning, start, stop, and keep.